A 58-meter fishing trawler is going down in the freezing waters of the Bering Sea.
Everybody up! Now! Now! Abandon ship!
47 crew members are fighting for their lives.
We're all scared. I was scared.
I did have a conversation with God. Okay, I'm just gonna jump in the Bering Sea.
It triggers one of the most daring rescue missions in Coast Guard history.
We knew that there was more people in the water than we could rescue. It was too far out there.
But in this frigid and unforgiving sea, can they get there before it's too late?
How many people were going to die? Not everybody was coming home.
Easter weekend on the Bering Sea. The 58-meter fishing trawler Alaska Ranger is making her way through freezing wind and high waves. The ship and her crew of 47 are on an 800-kilometer voyage from Dutch Harbor, Alaska, to some of the richest fishing grounds in the world, the Petrel Bank. The long trip out gives little hint of the dangers ahead. Ship's cook Eric Haynes worked on the Alaska Ranger for 14 years. He knows just how bad it can get.
Thanks, Eric. I don't know what I'd do without you.
It's pretty wild and woolly sometimes, and you don't know when that weather's going to kick up and when it's going to come. But half the time, what they tell you it's going to do, it does just the opposite.
Besides the weather, the work is dangerous. Bering Sea fishermen have among the highest mortality rates of any job in the country.
Unless you've been up there and you try to explain what it's like to get up and work in 20 or 30-foot seas and do that for 2, 3, 4, 5 days straight. I've seen Army Rangers come up there and break. They can't handle it.
Hey, how are you?
I can't complain. Yet.
Have a good sleep.
Yeah, thanks.
Ryan Shuck has been the tallyman on board for the past 8 months. He's the one who keeps count of the fish.
We work 12 on, 6 off, so out of 24 hours, you're literally working 18 of them. It's cold, it's wet, it smells like fish. Sometimes it smells like rotten, crappy fish. People hear about the money or they see on TV, like they went out for, 14 or 15 days. Each person made, $36,000 or whatever. They sometimes fail to hear what they're gonna have to do to obtain that money.
The journey to the fishing grounds should take 2 days. For the crew, it's their last chance to rest before the heavy work begins. At the end of his watch, Captain Pete Jacobson is relieved by First Mate David Silvera.
David?
Captain, anything I should know?
Not much. Got a 20-knot wind, gusting to 27. Other than that, I'm really tired.
You have a good night.
Have a good watch.
As the first mate keeps watch from the bridge, engineer Rodney Lundy monitors the ship's engines below deck.
Walked around, checking temperatures and gauges, and just checking everything.
Everything is quiet until
It was 2 o'clock when I had the alarm go off for a high bilge in the rudder room. These rudders always leaked a little bit of water, so I just thought it was not a problem. Everything was normal. I go back to the rudder room. All of a sudden, there's just water just gushing. I had just enough time to close that watertight door. First thing I did was call the bridge and talk to David Silvera.
Wheelhouse.
Dave, it's Rod. We got major flooding in the rudder room.
Need to sound general alarm. and head toward the closest land.
Pete, what's going on?
Eric Haynes rushes to the bridge. Is this a drill or is it real?
We're taking out water.
Get everybody into their suits. Now.
Everybody up. Now, now, now. Everybody up. This is not a drill. Get up. Everybody up. This is not a drill. Everybody up.
You know, I just started going through rooms because we've had times where the alarm has gone off and not everybody responds.
Now, wake up. Get up. Up, up, up. Come on, get up.
What's going on?
Everybody to the bridge right now.
As the crew heads to the bridge, Lundy and a fellow engineer check to see if the flooding has spread to other parts of the ship.
The ramp room, which is the compartment right above the rudder room, had 3 480-volt transformers distributed electricity throughout the boat. I knew as soon as those transformers got full of water, it was going to short out and lose power.
If the transformers go, the power steering goes, and they lose control of the ship.
Then I hear this screech, you know, like metal tearing. And then water started rushing up.
No, 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 no. We gotta get out of here, now!
The flooding has spread up to the ramp room with shocking speed. Lundy has managed to shut the door, but now there's no way to stop the rising water from reaching the transformers.
I had the water contained, but you couldn't pump it out even if you had pump, because it's behind watertight doors.
Bridge, it's Captain.
Pete, it's Rod. The water's in the ramp room now. It's flooding fast. We're gonna lose power soon.
Even more terrifying, Lundy knows the flooding can't be stopped.
I said, I can't close that starboard vent cover. If the water reaches that level, it's gonna flood the engine room. We're gonna go starboard hard, and we're gonna sink.
Send the mayday to the Coast Guard. Ron, get in your seat. You get up here now. Mayday, mayday, mayday.
This is Alaska Ranger. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Alaska Ranger.
Kodiak Station. Go ahead, Ranger.
The distress call is received by the Coast Guard station in Kodiak, Alaska, over 1,000 kilometers away.
We're taking on water. We're about 130 miles west of Dutch Harbor.
What position?
53 degrees. 53 minutes north. 168 degrees. 58 minutes west.
Rescue divers are dispatched immediately in 2 helicopters. One from land and one from sea. But it will take them at least 2 hours to get there. If the crew members have to abandon ship, how will they survive in this bitter, unforgiving sea?
Everybody was in the wheelhouse trying to put on their suit, so it was kind of chaos.
Okay, I got you.
We were all scared. You know, I was scared.
A survival suit can increase the chances of remaining alive in the icy waters from mere minutes to over 5 hours, if it fits.
Yeah, I just need a smaller suit. This one's too big.
You can't wear your shoes or boots or whatever in a survival suit, or your hoodie, because the hood will make it not work right. Eric Haynes, he was kind of our voice from the captain.
Okay, you're good. No worries.
He told us the Coast Guard knows we're here.
Is everybody okay? Does everybody have a suit?
Yeah.
At that point, we thought we're going to be able to stay afloat. We're not going to sink. We just have to wait it out, and the Coast Guard are going to get here.
But the Alaska Ranger is out of time.
The transformers shorted out. Boat went black.
Everything just kind of got quiet.
You could hear things popping and pinging. It sounded like maybe parts were blowing through the deck. Some battery lights kicked on.
The boat just shifted.
The Alaska Ranger begins listing to the starboard side, and her stern is sinking fast.
It felt like it was gonna roll over.
Abandon ship! Abandon ship! Let's go!
And then there was some panic. The people were inside, started running outside.
The whole back deck was under the water.
Launch the raft!
The crew struggles to abandon ship in the high wind and waves. Nothing goes according to plan.
So we lost the raft, but it just kept going on out. I grabbed the painter line, tried to pull it back, and then it just broke away. It was just gone. Let's get going, guys. I said, you're going in one way or another.
In these freezing temperatures, they can only hope to survive till the Coast Guard arrives.
It's hard to get up enough courage to be like, okay, I'm just gonna jump in the Bering Sea. I hit the water, and 8-9 gallons of water just came rushing in that suit. Took my breath away.
Shuck's suit is too big and it's filling with water. The situation is desperate.
I could see the raft. It was coming right towards me. It was coming fast. It hit me, blam, right in the face, and then it sucked me underneath. Finally spit me out. Then I seen the backside of the raft going away from me. The raft is gone. So I was kind of thinking, I'm screwed.
As Shuck struggles in the water, Lundy's troubles start before he's even jumped in.
I seen a bunch of lights bobbing up and down, which were guys floating out in their suits. I grabbed my lanyard on my light, pull it, my light doesn't work. I knew then that if I didn't get in a life raft, they wasn't gonna find me. And so I just took my glasses off and threw them in the Bering Sea, because I wasn't expecting to ever use them again.
Alaska Ranger rears up into her final death throes.
The boat was like this. I didn't jump over, I fell.
Alaska Ranger is gone. Somehow, Eric Haynes and a handful of others have made it to rafts.
I thought to myself, how many people are gonna die? Not everybody was coming home.
Rod Lundy, Ryan Shuck, and the rest of the ship's 47 crew are scattered across the frigid, storm-tossed seas. How many can hold out until help arrives? Easter Sunday, 2008. The fishing vessel Alaska Ranger has disappeared into the cold, windswept waters of the Bering Sea. Less than half of her 47 crew have made it into life rafts. The rest are scattered in the freezing ocean. Ryan Shuck's too big survival suit is supposed to be keeping him alive, but it's filling with water. Deadly hypothermia is setting in.
It's like a cold like I've never been. My hands were so cold I couldn't feel them. My feet were so cold I couldn't feel, probably from like the knees down. I was just numb. Well, I kind of kept keeping up hope and keeping up hope. You know, they'll be here anytime, they'll be here anytime.
The closest of 2 Coast Guard helicopters is still more than 30 minutes away. Rescue swimmer Abram Heller knows the longer someone is in the water, the less likely they'll be found alive.
120 miles from land, the water temperature was just a smidge above freezing. We assume that somebody has about 2 hours in a survival suit in those conditions.
With 47 people in the water, the Coast Guard faces one of the biggest airborne rescues in its history.
I think everybody's mentality is we're gonna do the best we can and we're probably not gonna get everybody, but it was too far out there, so time is a huge issue.
From his life raft, Haynes can see his crewmates in the water. But what can he do to help?
I was just looking out at what, people that were out there so that we could get anybody that was close by. In a life raft, you can survive for days. In the water, you're only gonna survive for a few hours.
In the water, the situation is desperate. Like Shuck, Lundy's badly fitting suit is filling with water. Worse, his strobe light is broken, so no one can see him.
It was just complete blackness. I didn't know if I was going up or down or sideways, very disoriented. And then I seen the life raft, and it was coming straight at me, and my suit was full of water. So I couldn't pull myself up into this thing. But God was looking out for me that night. But these 2 guys reached down and pulled me inside that life raft. And I'm telling you, I've never been more happy in my life.
For about an hour, we kept yelling. And we didn't realize at that point probably nobody else was gonna come. They were too far off.
After nearly 2 hours in the water, Ryan Shuck is starting to lose his battle against exhaustion and hypothermia.
I was just floating around there alone, and after a while, it kind of just got too hard. It got physically really painful. I was just gonna unzip that suit, let it fill with water. I did have a conversation with God and just let my parents and, I had a daughter, just let all these people know that like I'm okay going out like this. I'm cool with it. I gave myself kind of a timeline in my head, like, next 10, 15 minutes, what the best of my calculations. I'm just gonna do it. And then all of a sudden I could hear it real faintly, the helicopter sound. It flew right to me, shined its light on me. I was doing this, and it picked the nose up and it took off. I was thinking, now what the hell?
Just when Shuck thinks he's going to be rescued, the helicopter moves on. The Coast Guard needs to establish how many survivors are in the water before they can begin the rescue.
The first helicopter, when they arrived, the survivors were spaced a few hundred yards apart. About half of them were in 2 life rafts, and the other half were free-floating in survival suits in the waves.
And the first thing we heard, just this loud, just drone, just kind of coming over. You just knew what it was. And we waved to them. We're okay. Go get the other guys. We knew those guys needed the help right away.
The plan is to rescue those floating farthest from the center first and work their way in. Ryan Shuck is among the first they hoist to safety.
And then it came back to me, and then it shined its light at me again. And then I seen the rescue swimmer coming down on a line, and he hit the water. He kind of spun me around, put my back to him, and pulled me. And me and him were gonna go up together in the harness. I was the first one out.
Soon after Ryan Shuck is rescued, Abram Heller arrives in the second helicopter.
And I remember kind of looking around and realizing the enormity of the situation. We knew that we were biting off more than we could chew. There was more people in the water than we could rescue.
The first helicopter can only handle 12 survivors. Abram Heller's chopper can carry even fewer. It means they'll have to do several trips to drop off survivors on the Coast Guard cutter Monroe.
I swam up, communicate with the guy, signal, ready for pickup. They'd lower the basket as close to us as they could, and I'd put the survivor in, and up he would go. And move to the next survivor and do it again.
Heller and the Coast Guard rescue team work non-stop for more than 5 hours to pull more men from the water.
A small life raft floating the Bering Sea led Coast Guard rescuers to survivors of a sinking fishing vessel. The Alaska Rangers started taking on water when the crew radioed in a mayday.
Understand you are flooding, taking on water in the stern. Understand 47 persons on board.
Despite a long search that stretches into the following day, one crew member is still missing. The Alaska Rangers' sister ship, the Alaska Warrior, joins the Coast Guard cutter Monroe in search and rescue efforts and helps with the grim task of collecting bodies.
It's rewarding for sure. It's not all days like the Alaska Ranger. That's, 10 times bigger than anything else I'll do the rest of my career for sure.
In the end, rescuers save the lives of 42 crew members from the Alaska Ranger and find the bodies of 4 more who didn't make it. The 5th crew member is missing. His body is never found.
The hardest part of the whole scenario, the whole accident, was dealing with the casualties. Especially because I knew some of those guys really well. The 5 people died. Good guys that did some pretty cool stuff out there that helped people helped each other out there. A lot of people helped each other.
The Coast Guard must now find out what happened to the Alaska Ranger and why 5 fishermen are dead. With more than 1,500 fishing vessels operating on the Bering Sea, it will be up to them to try to make one of the deadliest jobs in America safer. Captain Michael Rand is appointed to chair the highest level of investigation the Coast Guard convenes, a Marine Board of Investigation.
The goal of the Marine Board, like any investigation, is to find the root cause of the casualty, but to also look at all the circumstances involved. What caused the vessel to be in a position that it would have had this casualty?
Rand wants technically savvy officers with investigative experience. He chooses Benjamin Hawkins.
Tragically, we lost 5, but we could have lost all 47 based on where it was.
Rand also chooses John Nadeau.
You're empowered as that Marine Board to go and just do everything you need to do to get to the root causes and try and figure out how to prevent that from happening again.
And the ship was in water that was much too deep for us to ever go, and too remote of an area that we were never going to be able to send down a remotely operated vehicle to look at it.
The challenge: investigators have to solve the sinking of the ship and the loss of 5 lives without a shred of physical evidence. The fishing vessel Alaska Ranger is at the bottom of the Bering Sea. Unable to examine the ship itself, Coast Guard investigators try to determine what caused the sinking and the deaths of 5 crew.
The only evidence we had was a testimony of the witnesses and survivors. To start to collect their testimony and to hear what they had to say, the longer time goes by, the more the story changes in their mind, whether they know it or not.
Each had their own story, their own piece of the puzzle. What were they thinking? Why were they doing this? Why'd they do that? Some of the key people, unfortunately, were lost in the casualty. You know, the master, the chief mate.
Mr. Lundy, thanks for coming in. No problem.
Rodney Lundy's testimony could be critical. He's been with the ship more than 10 years, and he's the one who found the flooding.
One of the first objectives was to determine what caused the flooding.
Well, after the alarm went off, I made my way back to the rudder room.
Lundy has a terrifying story to tell. He describes the mysterious flooding in the rudder room and how it spread so fast.
It's like a wall of water. It's like nothing I'd seen. We had to have lost a rudder.
He thought the rudder had fallen off.
Lundy remembers the rudder needed repairs just hours before the disaster struck.
I explained to him that the rudder was leaking, which it had been all day long. So I had to grease it with like 7 gallons of grease. And that's not normal.
Hours later, the flooding looked like it was coming from the exact location of that leaky rudder post.
Wheelhouse.
Dave, it's Rod.
I explained to him we dropped the starboard rudder.
Sound the general alarm.
Losing a rudder fits. It would explain the flooding in the stern of the ship, and also what happened next.
Steering not responding.
Moments after the flooding began, the captain lost control of the ship. Is it because the starboard rudder fell off?
It had to be a rudder.
Given the size of the rudders, if you did lose a rudder, that would cause some pretty significant flooding back there quickly. So that seemed like a plausible scenario.
Losing rudders, it's not something you hear of every day. So it was something that we needed to look at. You start saying, well, how do you lose a rudder?
To answer that question, Rand turns to Coast Guard investigator and engineer Ken Olson.
I had worked with Ken off and on through the years. I knew that he was a very thorough and detail-oriented investigator.
All right, let me show you. Now,
Olson immediately doubts it was a dropped rudder that caused the disaster.
The rudders are designed not to fall out. It had about a 12-foot rudder post coming up out of the rudder through the hull.
this is the rudder configuration.
And then on top of the rudder is a tapered area. It forms a very, very tight interference fit is what they call.
The rudder is held in place by a carefully designed assembly consisting of more than a dozen different parts. Even if it was loose and leaking seawater, Olson can't believe it would fall out.
It's secured pretty heavily, and the likelihood of it coming apart by itself would seem to be very unlikely.
It's impossible, simply because too many things had to be compromised for the rudder to drop.
So we weren't convinced that the rudder had fallen off. There was something else back there flooding.
If it wasn't a lost rudder, whatever it was, allowed enough seawater in to sink the 58-meter ship. According to Lundy, he shut the watertight door. So how did the flooding spread?
Flooding should be contained. Maybe lose equipment, but you shouldn't sink. So you start wondering, well, why did it keep flooding? Why did the flooding progress?
We need to know a lot more about this ship.
The investigators can't get to the Alaska Ranger for clues, but they can get to the next best thing. Her sister ship, the Alaska Warrior. The two are almost identical.
The Alaska Warrior was also owned by the same company, and so arguably was maintained in a similar condition to what we might have found the Alaska Ranger.
They examine the Alaska Warrior, and what they find is troubling.
You get a sense for how they operate, how the vessel's maintained. Watertight doors, which only work if they're secured and closed, would be tied open. So if your doors are open like that, well, obviously you're not gonna be containing the flooding.
Another door left open?
I mean, you just looked around the door frame and you see like a 2-inch pipe through the bulkhead that had nothing flanking it off. I mean, it was an open pipe penetration that exposed the rudder room to the rest of the engineering spaces. And then we actually had holes in the bulkhead where she had just rusted through.
Shoddy maintenance, holes and watertight doors tied open. They don't explain how the flooding started, but they certainly show how it might have spread to the rest of the ship.
As we're looking at the Warrior, it just pretty much validated what we already suspected, that the Alaska Ranger had poor watertight integrity.
Investigators now have a solid theory about how the flooding spread, but they still have no idea how it started. They interview Ryan Shuck. He worked on the Alaska Ranger as a tallyman counting the fish. Is he aware of any part of the ship that may have been damaged or leaking?
The hull, maybe. I know it took some damage on our trip in that ice.
Shuck describes an incident earlier that year.
We might have gotten damaged then.
We were fishing out in the solid ice where it was frozen like a lake.
Fishing in icy waters is common practice on the Bering Sea. It's dangerous, and captains need to exercise caution. But according to Shuck, that's not what happened.
We were going full speed. I mean, I don't know how fast that boat goes, 12 knots or something, but that's way too fast through that ice. You could hear it, it just went.
We knew that she was not built to operate in ice. And depending on what types of ice she was operating in, there was a possibility that she damaged the hull.
Investigators wonder, why would a seasoned captain risk damaging his ship? What Shuck says next takes them completely by surprise.
The fish master, while he was on the helm,
The fishing master?
Yeah, Kono, he took us through.
What they've just heard is about to move the investigation in a whole new direction. If someone else on the bridge was calling the shots, not only is it dangerous, it's also against the law. The Coast Guard investigation into the sinking of the Alaska Ranger has heard troubling testimony from her crew. It seems not only was the ship driven recklessly through the ice, but the person driving the ship wasn't authorized to do so.
Get your signature on these real quick.
Kono, the fish master, I actually had a lot of dealings with him being the tally person. He picked where we fished.
Fishmaster Satoshi Kono's job is to find the richest fishing areas for the ship. But investigators learn on a previous voyage, Kono also took control of the ship.
How much longer till we're out of this ice, you think?
Not too long. We'll get that.
Might have had some damage then.
When we heard testimony from crew that the fishmaster was in charge of the Alaska Ranger, it immediately sets off red flags for the Marine Board. That certainly flies in the face of our regulations, and any idea that somebody else is directing the movements or the operation of the vessel is not acceptable.
It was against regulations for the unlicensed fishmaster to take control of the vessel. For one thing, it could make the crew dangerously uncertain about who was calling the shots.
Thanks, Eric. I don't know what I'd do without you.
Theoretically, the captain's supposed to be in charge of the boat. As far as the Coast Guard is concerned, the captain's in charge of the boat.
You done with that? I'm heading back down.
Yeah, thanks.
But the fishmaster on these boats is like the head guy. You don't mess with him.
Find us the fish, buddy. Find that money.
Yes, yes.
There's no evidence that Kono was controlling the ship on the day of the disaster. But it's a worrisome sign that regulations weren't always being followed.
Here and here. That's where we start.
Let's have a look.
Was the Alaska Ranger taking other chances to get to the fish?
It takes a couple of days.
Be better to get there faster.
We're there to make money. So everybody wanted to be the first out there, first fishing, and beat the other guys.
On the day of the disaster, the Alaska Ranger left port at about 12 o'clock. Several hours before their sister ship, the Alaska Warrior.
Well, normally you go out there with another boat, because if something happens, there's somebody close by to give you the aid, whatever you need. That far, we always went with somebody else. But for whatever reason, we didn't want to wait.
Investigators want to know if the Alaska Ranger's need for speed could have caused damage to the ship's hull.
So apparently they transited through ice sometimes, fishing on the edge.
Now they may have evidence to prove it.
We managed to get some pictures, some photographs that some of them had taken in the ice.
A member of the Alaska Ranger's crew captured photographs and video on that earlier voyage.
We had to analyze and determine whether that could have been a source of the flooding. The Coast Guard also has a fleet of icebreakers, so we had some in-house expertise.
Okay, I got it all queued up here.
Coast Guard experts study the images and are able to estimate the thickness of the ice. But they don't think it's what sank the ship.
They looked at it and told us that, from their experience, that while the ship may have run through the ice, if the ice had caused the failure, it would have occurred at the time. It wasn't the kind of thing that they're going to hit a piece of ice now and 2 months later, a plate is going to start to leak.
Sorry, gentlemen. I don't think ice is behind this.
But in the end, there was really nothing there that we could say that how the ice at any time could have impacted the after part of the vessel.
Investigators are back at square one.
So thanks for coming in, Mr. Haynes.
They return to testimony about the events of that night, hoping for a lead. Ship's cook Eric Haynes tells them he had a front row seat to everything.
I went into the wheelhouse. There was all kinds of commotion going on.
According to Haynes, something strange happened after they lost power. The ship started moving in an unusual way.
All of us just lunged forward like this.
What would cause that? When you start losing power, what's going on?
So after that, I went out to get the rafts, because Captain Pete said we were going down.
When Haynes launched the raft, it unexpectedly pulled away, moving beyond the front of the ship.
And that rope just took off, right through my gloves, right through my hands.
Why would that happen? That makes no sense. Why is a raft shooting past the bow?
Investigators know the bizarre movement of the ship and its life rafts could be the clue they've been looking for. It may finally explain what happened on board the Alaska Ranger moments before she went down. Investigators have heard the Alaska Ranger appeared to be moving away from her life rafts moments before she sank. They believe it might explain why the ship went down so fast.
Hey, I've got the plans.
Okay, let's take a look at this.
We started to look at the design of the ship and try and figure out, okay, what was going on.
The team starts by collecting technical plans of the ship's propulsion system. The Alaska Ranger had controllable pitch propellers. These propellers can shift into reverse without changing their direction of rotation. Instead, changing the angle of the blades determines whether the boat goes forward or backward. But there's an unusual feature on this propeller that's of particular interest to the investigators. The blades are kept at the correct pitch by electric motors, but if the power is interrupted, the pitch of the blades can drift into reverse.
We were able to determine that should it lose power, the controllable pitch propellers would go full astern.
Let's go! Launch the raft!
After the electrical power went out, the engines were still running, driving the ship in reverse at the worst possible moment.
When Eric, the cook, launched the raft, he saw it go shooting past the bow. And then that's when we realized that the ship was going full astern, and they didn't know it.
With the stern compartments flooded and riding low, driving backwards would have buried the rear deck into the oncoming seas.
As soon as she started backing down, you would expect the master to have killed the engine so that she wouldn't keep doing that. That didn't happen.
And the master may not have had any idea. We don't know. We never were able to ask him.
Abandon ship! Abandon ship! Let's go!
Whether the captain was unaware or unable to shut down the engines, investigators now know why the attempt to abandon ship went so badly. But they still have no idea what triggered the flooding in the first place.
We were struggling. We knew that it happened in the stern. The flooding had started in the stern, but we really couldn't find that one piece of evidence that gave us that, aha, this is what it is. This is where it came from.
With the formal hearings over, the Marine Board turns their focus to the ship.
So on one hand, we approach the investigation from the standpoint of collecting testimony from all the surviving crew members. And that kind of helps us build a story of what happened. But in a similar manner, we have to rebuild the story of the ship itself. And it's often laid out in the plans of the ship and the modifications that were made along the way.
They subpoena the owners of the Alaska Ranger for their files and start digging through her service record looking for clues. Was there a weakness in the ship's structure, a faulty repair or modification that could have triggered the disaster?
So she was built in Louisiana to supply the oil rigs.
The Alaska Ranger was built in 1973.
And at some point, she was bought and converted into a fish processor.
Records show that over 45 years in service, the ship underwent numerous modifications.
What the impacts of those modifications might have been on the vessel and how they may have been part of the loss is something we need to piece back together and reconstruct.
Once again, investigators turn to engineer Ken Olson to see if something's been missed. As Olson searches through the ship's maintenance records, he notices something intriguing. Over the years, a series of small fractures have been repaired in the aft section of the hull. Olson wonders if they could be related.
It clearly pointed that there was a lot of stress and strain on the aft end of the vessel.
Then he gets a lucky break. He discovers a photograph taken during one of the repairs, showing where struts connect the ship's propeller ducts to the hull.
In that photograph is a guy welding on one of the struts. Wait a minute, why would they have to be welding on the struts? And you ask yourself.
Now that's weird.
These struts have no moving parts. They almost never have to be repaired. Olson thinks he may have found the smoking gun.
Got it.
If he's right, it could finally explain what happened to the Alaska Ranger. More than a year after the sinking of the Alaska Ranger, Coast Guard investigators are closing in on the possible cause.
Gentlemen, I think we got something here.
A series of repairs in the aft section of the ship's hull.
Welds, welding here.
If there was any aha moment, it's when you're looking in this photo of this repair work being done. Doesn't seem to make sense in the first place.
The repairs are for stress cracks. Ken Olson thinks they may have been caused when heavy steel propeller ducts were added to the ship. The ducts surround the propeller to improve thrust and fuel efficiency. Extremely heavy, they can weigh more than a ton each. The struts that hold the ducts in place need to tie into the internal structure of the ship. If they're attached only to the outside surface of the hull can weaken and fracture. Perhaps the unusual repairs were done to fix a botched installation.
Here are the modification plans.
Olson has searched the records.
A
He found plans for 2 different methods to safely attach the ducts.
and B.
So which one did they use?
Neither.
So the struts weren't welded into the frame?
No, sir.
Rather than going through the hull up into the structure and the beams, they just attached it right to the outside of the hull, which is not a good way to hang it.
Now you have something that's subjected to a lot of vibration by the rotating propellers. And eventually these welds that are holding it to the shell are going to start to crack.
And then we looked at the maintenance records, realized that they had done repairs around the nozzles almost each time the ship had been in dry dock since they'd been installed.
If the weld on the starboard strut gave way, it would have torn a hole in the same area in the rudder room where the flooding began.
The struts being directly underneath the rudder room certainly would have fit the scenario of Rodney Lundy saying, it's flooding.
The location of the strut weld is so close to the rudder post that even a seasoned crewman like Rod Lundy could have mistaken the source of flooding.
Wheelhouse. Dave, it's Rod. We got major flooding in the rudder room. Sound the general alarm.
I still kind of remember that day when we're like, it's this. This has got to be it.
2 years after the sinking of the Alaska Ranger, the Coast Guard concludes the tragedy likely started when a strut attaching the starboard propeller duct broke, tearing a hole in the ship's hull. It triggered a massive flood in the ship's rudder room.
Now, wake up! Get up! Up! Come on, get up!
What's going on?
Everybody to the bridge right now!
Lack of watertight integrity due to poor maintenance allowed the flooding to spread.
No. We gotta get out of here now!
There was nothing the crew could do to stop it. The flood led to a power failure. Which caused the controllable pitch propellers to shift into reverse. As the ship buried itself into the sea, the captain was either unaware or unable to shut off the engines.
The boat was going in full astern. We were digging our own grave.
It condemned 5 men to their deaths in the icy sea. In their final recommendations, the Marine Board of Investigation takes direct aim at fishing companies with poor maintenance standards that put crews' lives at risk.
One of our primary conclusions was the Coast Guard had to go back and seek more legislative authority to be able to require fishing vessels to be inspected by the Coast Guard to determine that they are being maintained properly, that they're going to be safe for the people that are sailing on them.
The Alaska Ranger got a lot of significant attention and has, I think, really helped improve the safety of some of these vessels, these older fishing vessels that are still out there.
We know that some of those fishermen going to sea are safer now than they were before. But that said, we're tireless about pursuing safety, and we're not going to stop until we know that people are safe at sea.
The story of the Alaska Ranger is one of tragedy marked by the loss of 5 men. But it is also the story of survival and daring rescue.
Once I got home, it was like I used to be a fisherman and that was cool, but I also knew I never was going to do it again.
I love that boat. I mean, it was like a piece of me went down with the Ranger.
I look back and it kind of haunts me a little bit. The guys that didn't come home.